It's 3:47 a.m. in the Persian Gulf. 3 Kilo-class submarines, Tariq, Yunus, and MW, kill their lights and slide into the thermal layers, hunting the USS Abraham Lincoln. But what if the real hunt already ended days ago? Satellite imagery caught them loading torpedoes before they even left port. Stay with me as a P-8A Poseidon at 28,000 feet links the first whispers of their signatures to the entire carrier group in 45 seconds. When Tariq finally pulls the trigger, you'll see why the US response is described as ice cold, and why the subs never stood a chance. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. The lights snap off at 3:47 a.m., but the real action didn't start in the Gulf. It started days earlier at a dockyard far away, under clear skies and satellite orbits. A switch flipped in space, not on a control panel. Someone logged a pattern that meant one thing: combat loadout. That's where the clock started, long before anyone heard a ping or felt awake. Tehran's play leaned on silence. Kilos on batteries, no radio checks, no callouts. They planned to creep along thermal layers like a shadow under warm paint, using electric motors that don't scream, they hum. Every mile, they'd hug the gradients, where warm and cool water bend, sound like glass, counting on the gap to swallow their signatures. Minimal periscope time, minimal speed, minimal risk. That's the theory when you want to move a knife without showing the blade. So why trust the dark in the loudest sea on Earth? The Gulf roars with tankers, tugs, crew boats, and fast ferries. It's shallow, busy, and unforgiving. But that chaos is the whole bet. If everything makes noise, you hope your noise disappears. If wakes and cavitation blur together, you hope your slow prop merges with the hum. You play the odds that the enemy can't sort the clutter in time. Here's the Kilo's playbook in plain terms. You slow to a crawl to cut blade rate. You ride on batteries to avoid diesel clatter. You keep to shallows so shore echoes mask you. You hide under merchant lanes because nothing confuses a sensor like a forest of hulls. You don't dash, you don't chase. You wait for the perfect geometry and then slide forward one careful knot at a time. But satellites don't need your permission. Wide area surveillance watches peers the way a metronome keeps time. Massent hunts for behavior, not stories. Torpedo crates don't lie. Forklifts don't go for coffee at 2 a.m. if nothing's moving. A support truck idles in the same corner 2 nights in a row. Thermal spots blink near a crane bay after hours. You don't need a confession when the dock routine goes off script. Analysts love repetition. Crane booms swing to the same bay 3 times in a week. Ordnance pallets roll, get staged, then vanish before dawn. A tug ties up by a designated slip on an odd schedule. Wet footprints on the quay show fresh cooling water discharges. You add it up, and it spells go. Not maybe, go. The Gulf's floor complicates the game even more. It's shallow, with silt that bounces sound, and channels that act like mirrors. Layers form and break with diurnal heating. A sub can get a pocket of quiet, then run smack into a wall of its own noise thrown back at it. A good navigator treats those layers like lanes on a map. A good network treats them like lasers, pointing straight at you. So while the subs believed the blackout made them ghosts, the network had already pinned a window. When they'd sail, where they'd stage, and which lanes they'd try to borrow. Tariq never owned the first move. It belonged to the watchers who stamped coordinates on a calendar, then waited. The mission was blown at the pier. The battery charge was clean. The paperwork trail wasn't. If space kept the ledger, the next voice would come from the sky. What can an aircraft at 28,000 feet hear in the ocean that a submarine hopes no one does? More than the crew down below wants to believe. The first hint isn't a roar. It's a scratch on a radar sweep, a clean-edged wake where one shouldn't exist, and a faint spike where sea clutter should be flat. That thin line is enough to start a thread, and once a thread appears, the needle starts moving fast. A P-8A Poseidon begins to stitch those clues together. Its radar sees surface wakes with sharp returns, even when the periscope barely kisses the air. EO/IR cross-checks a ripple that lingers too long behind a low profile. ESM stays quiet because the subs hold their tongues, but that silence is a data point too. Down the belly, racks of sonobuoys wait. The crew plots wind, current, and tanker lanes, then seeds a pattern that drifts into the right gaps. Here's the problem they need to solve. Faint and inconsistent isn't the same as useful. A wake fades. A periscope wash blends into whitecaps. A single buoy hears a thump that might be a pump, or a wave slap. Can that noise turn into a target fast enough to change what a destroyer does in the next 5 minutes? It can, if every sensor reports in the same language at the same time. That's where Link 16 turns whispers into action. The Poseidon's console packages bearing, range estimates, and confidence scores, then flicks it across encrypted air. In under a minute, every ship and the quiet partner below get the same plot. No waiting for voice calls, no copy errors. The data hops from air to sea to sub, and each node adds what it knows. One aircraft's weak readout becomes a common picture. The tactics go multi-static. Instead of chasing with one ear, the Poseidon uses many. Some sonobuoys transmit pings, others just listen. Their geometry lets echoes paint a slow, dense object in lanes crowded with steel. Radar modes tune for micro-Doppler on small protrusions, masts and scopes that wobble different from spray off a bow. You don't need a full shadow, just the way it moves. In one pass, the Poseidon drops a buoy field across a tanker track and listens for a metallic cadence under 3 knots. 2 buoys catch a narrowband line that stays put while the ships around it cycle speeds. The Doppler says slow mover. The spectrum says machinery, low RPM. It's tucked inside legitimate traffic, but its rhythm doesn't match a freighter's big, even churn. Shallow water makes it tricky. Reverberation throws back ghost hits. Sand and silt scatter returns. A sloppy buoy pattern will lie to you, but the lies don't hold up across modes. False contacts flicker and die as angles change. Real anomalies keep bleeding through different sensors. The noise helps hide the target and helps highlight it, depending on how long you watch and where you place your ears. The carrier group doesn't need a face, only threads to pull. Bearings cross from radar and buoys. Towed arrays on the escorts pivot to the hinted sectors. The Virginia updates its notebook with fresh lines. In minutes, the sketch becomes a map. 2 subs get tagged with call signs and bearing ranges. Above them, the net tightens. Below them, the quiet hunter that's been waiting slides a little closer. If the Poseidon announces the hunt, who holds the knife? It's the quiet shape under the fleet. A Virginia-class submarine sits off the lane, engines trimmed low, crew on headsets. Its BQQ-10 suite pulls in the ocean like a net. A bow sphere listens ahead. Wide aperture arrays on the flanks cut the beam spread. A long TB-29 tails behind in cleaner water, away from its own flow noise. Nothing flashes, nothing pings. The picture builds without a word said out loud. Shallow water makes this a tightrope. The corridor is full of reflection and engine rumble. A careless move throws a wake that a diesel boat will feel. So the American sub stays patient. It lets bearings drift across the plot in slow arcs. No course changes without cause. No extra knots unless geometry demands it. The question is simple and brutal. Can it read kilos at distance without painting a target on its own hull? Passive target motion analysis is the answer. You watch a bearing tick left, then hold. You mark time, then mark again. Over minutes and hours, those tiny moves reveal track, speed, and intent. A half-degree swing means a lot when you're steady. Stack enough of those swings, and you get a line that points to where the submarine will be, not where it was. That's gold in ASW, because you never had to talk to the ocean. You just listened. The sensors make that listening count. Hull arrays give you stability and a wide field. But the towed array, sitting in smoother water aft, stretches your ears. That longer aperture picks up fainter tonals and separates them from the ship's own flow. Geometry matters. Spread out the ears and you sharpen the bearings. The combination lets the crew sort out a diesel's low RPM tone from merchant churn, even when both live in the same lane. On watch, the Virginia builds 2 steady tracks at roughly 19 to 22 miles. The lines don't match any AIS shipping lanes the group already sees. Cross-correlation across the bow sphere and the towed array nails the cadence. Low blade rate, machinery lines in a band that stays too steady for a freighter that would be ramping in and out with traffic. These are deliberate movers, not bulk carriers on a schedule. Here's where old weapons show their age. Wire-guided torpedoes from the 1990s like slow, planned attacks. They need stable wires, predictable geometry, and crews that can steer around noise while they guide. A networked defense hates that. Surface ships light the water with active at the moment of launch. Helicopters drop sensors in the path. A sub like the Virginia tracks passively while ready to cut angles. The more the attacker slows to keep control on the wire, the more the net shapes around it, so the choices shrink fast. Close the range, and every sensor gets a better look. Break off, and the sortie burns fuel and time for nothing. No radio needed to feel that squeeze. The air, surface, and subsurface grids overlap until names replace shapes. Tariq and Anunais are now logged, labeled, and time-stamped, their bearing ranges updated in near real time. When cornered, someone fires first. Tariq makes that choice. 2 dots on a board become 2 warheads in the water. How fast can a fleet answer? Tariq commits first. At 6:02 a.m., he pushes 2 heavyweight, wire-guided torpedoes out of tubes 1 and 2. They leave a launch transient like a gunshot in a library, and every ear in the strike group hears the spike. Anunais answers with her own pair minutes later. 4 weapons in play, all set to creep under layers toward the carrier's outer ring. They're built for patience, not drama. And that matters in a sea where noise is both a shield and a snare. Slow and quiet sounds clever until you stack it against a wall of sensors that already knows your lanes. The question is simple. Can a 23-knot, wire-guided plan outlast a network that trades data in seconds and moves shooters to the right place without talking? The wires help the Iranian crews steer through clutter, but they chain the torpedoes to predictable arcs. The fleet doesn't need to outrun them. It needs to break their logic. Torpedoes live on trade-offs. Push for speed and you burn range. Ease back and you buy endurance, but give defenders more time to work angles. The seekers wait to sniff for targets, flipping from passive cues to active pings once they hit a gate in distance or time. In layers, sound bends, so a weapon might ride quiet under a thermal, then pop up through a duct and light itself up on somebody's screen. Wire guidance adds control, but hates shock, sharp turns, and jammers. Snap a wire, and the weapon falls to its own brain, which is simpler than a human hand on the stick. Doctrine fills the gap. U.S. destroyers don't debate an inbound threat. They counterfire. That means Mk-54s off the rails fast, cued by the same net that heard the launch bang. You don't wait for a perfect track. You fire into the bracket where the intercept math says the hostile wakes will be. The effect is time theft. Every second the attacker wanted to use for stealth is handed back to the defender in the form of angles and speed. Frankie Peterson Jr. does exactly that. 2 Mark 54s kick free and dive. Their seekers can sniff a target at up to about 6,000 yards, and they sprint near 45 knots to close the gap before the heavyweights can slither through a layer. They don't need to chase forever. They just need to force the hostile weapons to maneuver, to light up, to make mistakes the network can trap. Active rates climb across the group. Hull sonars ping faster. Helicopters light their dipping sets. Escorts tighten to form a moving fence. That pressure isn't noise for noise's sake. It shreds stealth by stripping away quiet pockets and driving course changes that break wire links and expose seekers. The same thermals that once masked a slow mover now help the defenders stack buoys and beams in the most likely corridors, predicting where the warheads must rise to sniff. The result lands fast. The first Iranian pair dies short of the boundary. The second pair follows. No wake near the carrier's bubble. No need to turn the big deck. Weapons spent, Tariq hears a harsher sound roll in, the ocean talking back at full volume. What does defeat sound like underwater? It's not an explosion, it's a metronome, a hard, steady pulse that turns the ocean into a clock you can't shut off. The first pings land like blunt taps on the hull, and then they tighten. Each return reminds the crew they are being timed, plotted, and boxed in. You can almost hear decisions fray at the edges as the cadence builds and the options shrink. The carrier strike group pushes the throttle on active prosecution. SQS-53C pings go high power and faster cadence, driving low-frequency energy across the corridor. Escorts sync to the rhythm, so the gaps close and the echoes stack where they need them. The water stops feeling neutral. It carries intent. Every cycle paints a cleaner outline of where a boat is, where it's turning, and how fast the mistake is happening. The message isn't subtle. Stay, and you'll get fixed. That's the choice the Iranian captains face. Write it out and hope the math breaks in your favor, or surface and throw the mission away to save the hull. Writing it out has baggage. Sustained ping trains work on nerves. Crews under constant acoustic pressure slip. Your helmsman overcorrects. Your engineer hesitates on a pump cycle. You drift a hair wide of the thermal, and now your noise blooms at the worst moment. One error breeds the next. There's a psychology to it. The ocean becomes a bright room, and they're the ones squinting. Judgment compresses under that beat. You keep thinking one more minute, and the net will shift. But the cadence keeps coming. Maneuvering stops being calm geometry, and turns into twitchy changes that the other side can read. That's where the fatal fixes happen, not in big blunders, but in a string of tiny, human ones. Layered prosecution pins the routes shut. Helicopters dip and move in a leapfrog, so the gaps between pings never cool off. Sonars fill the near field and catch the turns that give intent away. Each layer steals a different escape vector. You don't just feel hunted. You realize there's no silent lane left that buys you time. Under that pressure, the sequence breaks. Tariq blinks first. He surfaces just meters outside the carrier's defensive sphere, dead in the water and throwing no doubt about who owns the tempo. 8 minutes later, Uranus appears, lower in trim, crews already on the casing for the handoff. No chase footage, no fireworks, just 2 stealth boats made visible on demand, because the beat said when to rise and where. Then silence from the third contact. Either it never pressed in, or it peeled off early when the first act turned hot. That quiet turns into a phantom, with value of its own. Intel will comb for days to match that silence to peer routines, patrol cycles, and comm discipline. Even a no-show leaves fingerprints when everyone's patterns are already in the file. Now the narrative flips in plain view. The subs meant to define the engagement with stealth. Instead, they become lessons any ship on the horizon can read. The ice-cold part isn't about the intercepts. It's about control. The strike group sets the pace, decides the depth, and chooses the moment the fight stops. Control also has a price tag and a message. Shared vision erased stealth. The strike group didn't just spot contacts. It fused orbits, buoys, hull arrays, and towed ears into one view that turned shadows into schedules. That's the edge. Speed, consistency, and a common language that denies surprise before the first wire hums. You saw how space, sky, and a quiet boat below stitched a clean timeline. So here's the question that lingers. When the next invisible move starts, how early will the network flag it? And how much will be decided before anyone dares to dive?